Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, it's been another busy week already, hasn't it, Phil?
Yeah, already. Yeah, it's not just in the headlines, and I think we're going to be one of the shout outs today is the fantastic and long-awaited return of John O'Hanlon to the podcast, and giving us a good amount of his time, really. Going through where the business has been heading. Basically, it's been 2 years since he was on the podcast, and never mind this year already and what's happening in the next couple of weeks, which he shares on the podcast, but actually what's happened in that 2 years as well.
Exactly, because 2 years ago when we last spoke to him, he was a Volvo dealer, Solus Volvo dealer, wasn't he? But since then, they've added Kia, they've added MG, and they're just about to add Polestar. So he gives us a lowdown on Polestar, which opens next month, doesn't it?
Yeah. And there's stuff going on with Volvo at the minute as well that he was sharing with us, and gave us a sort of a view on their sort of targets, and now they're ahead of target in terms of that sort of volume and growth that they're expecting. So fantastic interview, and always massively upbeat and very cheery to speak to. Is John.
And we did subject him to a quick fire Q&A round, didn't we? Right at the end.
We did. I think he was more put off by that. I think everything else, he was pretty sort of on the point, knew what he was going to be talking about and everything else. And then we threw the questions in at the end there, and I think it threw him off his guard a little bit. He wasn't quite sure on a couple of them of which way to go.
Yeah, it was fascinating just hearing his responses. So we will have an extract from the interview on this week's show, but the full interview is available on your podcast feed. So do urge you to head over and listen to the full interview, because John was on absolutely top form.
Definitely. And again, this week we are returned with Stephen Whitton, who will be sharing some of his guru knowledge on the industry wellness and well-being with his Men Able moments. So do stay tuned for that one.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
So headlines this week are from Car Dealer, AM Online, Motor Trade News, and Motor Trade. I've just realised that that's a full house. We've got all the B2B dealer titles included. So this week we'll look at the new car registration figures for January. We've also got the van registration figures, and good news for both sectors there. We'll have a look at customer service and purchase issues, drive EV complaints, and also have a look at Constellation owner TDR taking a stake in Vertu Motors. And we'll also look at the impact that videos are having on used car sales, especially for dealers who don't post them.
But as Curtis said there, we're heading over to Car Dealer first. And as we know, the new car registration results for both cars and LCV have been published this week. And firstly, with cars, new car market grows for the 6th month in a row in best start to a year since before COVID. And that's where we're talking about 131,000, or just short of 132,000 registered in the month of January. And that was a 15% increase on what happened last January. So activity seems to be now returning, and a bit of a sort of production recovery and appetite in getting those vehicles into the market, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. So the figures for January marked the 6th month of consecutive growth, and that's actually prompted the SMMT to reforecast an 11% growth for this year, which would take the market up to just shy of 1.8 million units. So this latest outlook actually is encouraging news, because as we know, the new car market was under the cosh for certainly the last 2 years or
Yeah.
more. So, this is sign of a return to some form of recovery. Is still heavily dependent on the supply issues that we've talked about on and off over the last couple of years. But there's some encouraging news here. And some of the figures that really leapt out for me was the growth in fleet, because fleet registrations were actually up 37%. So that really helped power the January market. Retail actually dropped 4.3%, which is curious because I'm hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence that January was a busy time for dealers. So whether or not it was busier on the used side rather than the new side, I guess we'll know that in a couple of weeks' time when we catch up with Darren Martin from CAP HBI. But some of these stats are fascinating because the alternative fuel vehicles, so if you take plug-ins and hybrids together, accounted for 1 in 5 registered vehicles over the course of the month had a plug attached to it.
Yeah, and as you say there, the obviously with retail was the key driver last year in terms of the manufacturer focus, because that was where it was a more profitable market for the manufacturers to place product. There was obviously long lead times and order banks on new vehicles, particularly for cars. And some of those order banks are easing now as production comes in. We know that there's a bit of pressure in the economy, and particularly around consumer confidence with energy crisis and cost of living. That's having a little bit of impact on that. But clearly there was the leasing and fleet sector was for the majority of the time left out of it, because it is they do have to look at more incentives to get the product into those marketplaces. So positively, there is a little bit of appetite returning from the OEMs to get products into that much needed leasing and fleet sector. That they've got to get those vehicles on the road, get some of those more aged products and more mileage products off the road, and get them into the wholesale market. So you're starting to see a little bit of that, and there's a little bit of appetite to tactical pre-reg registrations now from the manufacturers, where they have products sat around them that they need to get registered, and a little bit of focus on getting some of those demonstrators and display cars taxed as well within the dealer network. So it's all positive in terms of that slow recovery. It's not coming too quickly, but it is just that slow marginal recovery that we're expecting this year.
Yeah, and some interesting trends in terms of the best sellers for the month, because if you were to look at this top 10 maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you'd have the Ford Fiesta at number 1, whereas this month it's number 10. And at number 1 for the first time ever is MG with the HS model, which is its large SUV. So that's a petrol and plug-in hybrid. But it was a good month for MG and its dealers, because it's also rated in position number 8 with the MG ZS. It's a compact SUV. So other brands in the top 10 include Vauxhall Corsa at number 5, Kia Niro at number 4, the Nissan Qashqai even at number 3, VW T-Roc number 2, and of course MG SH at number 1. And MG very pleased. They put out a press release celebrating them hitting the top spot for the first time.
Yeah, and without pushing it too much, but the interview there with John O'Hanlon that we're going to play a clip of, but listen to the full recording there, that's talking about MG as one of his new brands, and he got in there fairly early with them, and is benefiting from that growth. So one area there. I mean, just from a European perspective, there is things going on. I mean, you look at France. France have had an 8.8% recovery year on year, with just short of 112,000 registrations. Italy up 19% year on year at just over 128,000. Germany, interestingly, down 2.6% to 179,000. And Spain, this is where your numbers and percentages get thrown out a little bit here, Curtis, up 51.4% year on year.
So they had a particularly bad January last year,
Yeah,
I
they've gone
assume.
to just
Yeah.
over 64,000 this year. So last year they had a very bad time in January of last year in terms of that performance. So again, seems to be a general feeling that globally there is signs of a recovery to the new car registrations.
And heading over to AM Online, the headline there is SMMT predicts 2023 van registrations growth after 26% January increase. So good news here for the van market. So the SMMT is actually predicting growth of just shy of 14% this year after a strong start to the new year, with the first month of growth actually since September last year. And the SMMT's forecasts is based around an easing of some of the supply chain issues, and that's saying that it will help propel some recovery in the sector. So looking at January specifically, there was a 25.8% growth in registrations to just over 22,000 units. That compares with just 17,500 this time last year. And the registrations were pretty much across the board, across all the van weights, apart from some of the smaller sub 2-ton vans. And this is a good solid start to the year, and also notable that battery electric vans were actually up by 53.5% for the month.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to come in that LCV commercial vehicle market. We've seen recently with the TfL announcement down in London for the 32 boroughs of London getting a scrappage scheme support of 110 million for cars and LCVs, and that's particularly if you look into that, it is heavily weighted towards that LCV small business marketplace. We've got things like the Maxus now landing in the UK. I know I've spoken to a couple of dealers that are taking on Maxus, which is an EV commercial vehicle, and again they've launched a scrappage scheme to coincide with the TfL announcement as well. So there is a lot happening in that LCV sector. That this could be the year that we start to see sort of that recovery and growth for LCV, and that appetite going towards electric commercial vehicles, which has been sadly missed for some time.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
And John, next up is Polestar with this brand new site opening next month in Bristol. And this will be one of just, I think, 6 sites in the UK representing Polestar. Can you tell us how this came about, and also how different a proposition is this? Because Polestar operates a direct sales agency proposition. So can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, and it's very different. But I suppose as soon as I understood what Polestar could become, I wanted to be involved. I actually had a deposit down on a Polestar 1. I went out and test drove it out in Gothenburg. And that got me much more excited as you began to see what else was coming through in terms of product. And it's not entirely unique, but it is almost unique in terms of being a sporty, premium, fully electric vehicle offering that wants to define where it wants to go. And part of that is taking the car to customers today. And I think it's a fairly well-trodden path. So we're opening a space in the Cribbs Causeway in Bristol, which is a huge shopping mall, lots and lots of footfall. We've actually had a car in possession, and every time I go to have a little wander through and visit the site, actually the car's surrounded, and we know there's so much more product to come through in terms of 3, 4, 5, and the little sports car on 6. So they have a stunning range of product, but they're trying to do it in a slightly different way. They're trying to do it focused around the customer. And that's a little challenge for your traditional motor retailer mindset, where we would want to be, if a customer's in a showroom, they've probably done most of the research, and they're probably quite far down the funnel. Whereas with electric vehicles, and particularly a new brand electric vehicle, they'll probably be a little bit further up. The decision making takes longer, so we've got to, I think we've got to make sure that we look after them. And I think the way Polestar are doing that in terms of educating, informing, building the bond with the customer, selling a lot of the credentials of Polestar. And that's when you get into things like life cycle analysis and some of the sustainability and how they work round about that. The range on the new cars is on a Polestar 2 will be over 600 kilometers. There's lots and lots we can talk about round about that, but to do it in a sporty and a progressive way that will appall, some of the old, gasoline lovers out there who want noise, and an electric car can deliver a sporty ride, can do it in a very, very exciting way. And I think, we shouldn't shy away from that part. So yes, it is different. But I think I'm genuinely excited about this, almost a new way of working in partnership, because it's not wholesale, it's not true agency, it's a combination. That could be quite exciting for a small player who wants to grow quickly.
And in terms of how you're representing Polestar, can you just describe to listeners what your Polestar unit looks like? Is it a showroom within a shopping centre, or is it a retail outlet?
It's very difficult to explain.
Yeah.
It's almost a combination of a museum come cathedral come very, a very up to date, technical space. It's a lovely space to spend time in. And I was lucky enough to visit another dealer's space, and I just sat there and just watched the world go by. It's great. So you've obviously got cars on display. You've got the ability.
How many units would you have in there typically?
In terms of cars?
Yeah.
So I think we can get 3 cars in easily. So what you've also got is car parking outside for the demonstrations. So I think going forward, as the range grows, you get to use that space for not so much display, but allowing the customer to actually get to know the cars as they come through.
And just to follow up, I mean, you mentioned agency, and it's a kind of quasi-agency setup with Polestar, but it's quite interesting, the portfolio that you've got within the group, because you've got Volvo, who are going over to agency within the next few months, Kia and MG both sticking with the franchise model. So I'm just wondering, operationally, how much does it impact the group running this mix of agency and non-agency? And I was interested in what you said earlier about, even looking at things like turnover for the group. You won't, that will change as a result of some of your brands going down the agency route.
I think I'm less worried about the challenges for the group. I think we can deal with those. We work with and we have brand specialists alongside me, so we don't try to apply a one. This is exactly how we deal with every single. We can be bespoke to the brands, and I think the brands would expect that and demand it. So we've got a lot of the same systems and processes and procedures, but we do it to fit around and alongside what the brand would demand. So I think we can work alongside it. I think if you look, the wholesale model is tried and proven. The agency model has some real potential wins and opportunities. If we can take out the most frictional element for a lot of customers is the price. So if we can take that out, that's a big win. If we can actually have quicker delivery because we're in a national stock rather than a local stock, you can put those big ticks in the box. However, we are looking at systems. We are looking at speed of response on pricing, and all those things. Should worry a dealer. Should make a dealer think about it. And I think my view on that is to be as involved as possible, to work alongside, our partner, and to try and get as best position for it to work. I think Volvo has been really clear. They don't want to launch an agency until. I guess it'll be one of the stories you'll be picking up elsewhere. They don't want to launch agency until it's right, and that's absolutely the right thing. Don't be driven by a date. Be driven by getting the systems right, the policies right, the procedures right, and have everyone on board. You get one chance to make a first impression. You get one chance to get this right, and that's why it is important.
Well, that was really just a taster of a pretty long interview we ended up doing with John. I mean, John was happy to spend time with us and did actually cover a lot of ground, because it's as we said at the beginning, it's 2 years since we last caught up with him, but Waylands are particularly busy at the moment.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on. Yes.
Yeah. So next week opening a new site in Swindon, and next month debuting with Polestar. So lots going on there.
Yeah, and he was heading off down to the new Swindon to do some last minute snagging.
Yes.
Was what he was doing, and I say, fascinating interview there as always with John. So let's say that's a small snippet from it. So do head over to your podcast feed and have a listen to the full interview with John. You'll love the questions at the end there.
Okay, next headline is from Motor Trade News, and the headline there is "Customer Service and Purchase Issues Drive EV Complaints." So this is latest research from the Motor Ombudsman, and some interesting insight here into EV trends and the sort of typical complaints and grievances they're hearing from EV customers. So the piece says that issues relating to the purchase process or the service received from businesses after buying a car sparked the majority of consumer complaints about EVs last year. And that's about 41% of complaints. So the Motor Ombudsman said this marks an 8% year-on-year growth in the volume of disputes logged by individuals. So looking at customers who submitted a dispute about the purchase of an EV over the course of last year, 83% were in conjunction with a new car, while the remaining 17% stem from used models. And it's interesting when you start to look at some of the main problems reported, because EV owners came, a lot of the complaints were about component defects and faults occurring with the brakes, gearbox, suspension, and tyres. And this is particularly interesting, isn't it, Phil? Because we've actually covered a lot of this in sort of recent podcasts. The sort of, now that we're getting that sort of critical mass of pure EVs on the road, they're being driven in the real world, we're starting to hear about some of the issues related to brake wear and tear, suspension components, and of course tyre wear.
No, you're right there, and we talked about this just before we started to record, and that to your point, there is more complaints, yes, but there's also more volume of vehicles entering the market, both in the new and the used vehicle space. We know that there is, we talked a few times around the wear and tear of tyres to do with the torque and weight of EVs. That's clearly documented through the DVSA and DFT at the minute, and fleet operators have been talking about it within their sector. There's also a bit of pressure on the suspension arms as well, because of the same reasons of the torque and the weight of battery electric vehicles. So this is all now starting to appear. There's some clear evidence now and data now starting to come out on EVs. As volume starts to increase, you can start to get some comparisons around maintenance and repairs on battery electric vehicles compared to their equivalent combustion engines. So, there's still a little bit on this and a little bit of learning as well in terms of, customer expectations of some of these battery electric vehicles as to what goes wrong with them and the condition of them. So it's interesting to get the data, but it just needs putting in context that, there will be an increase because, there's a lot more of these vehicles on the road as we are aware of.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that dealers themselves are also on a sort of learning journey here, because if you were to go back a couple of years ago, dealers selling EVs, they'd typically have one or maybe two dedicated salespeople who are EV specialists who did that maybe as part of their job whilst selling petrol and diesel cars as well. But this has all changed now because, as we reported in the first story, the volume of new EVs has increased. So that speciality has actually got to be shared more widely within the showroom. So the sales staff, they gone are the days when you've got a dedicated EV person. Everyone's got to be aware of EVs and how to sell them and how to talk to customers about them, how to engage with customers about EVs.
Exactly. And there's, some of them are new. We've got new products coming from existing legacy manufacturers, but also you've got these new entrances that are coming into the marketplace as well. And, without going over the old Tesla story, Tesla's put out just short of 1.4 million vehicles. They've got a target of 1.8 million vehicles. You're going to get complaints and problems with those vehicles, aren't you? That kind of volume throughput. So, one to keep an eye on. But it's interesting that we're starting to see some data on EVs at all levels now.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable Moment, looking at mental health and wellbeing awareness, issues and best practices across the automotive sector with me, Stephen Whitton. Yeah, hi guys, time for another Menable Moments. Hope you're all well. Bear with me on this one. So, mental health, well-being, diversity, inclusion, equity, gender balance, health and safety, compliance, and the list goes on. Now, if you're a leader or a manager or an owner of a business in the automotive industry, I can totally understand how at the core of your being, you're thinking to yourself, I only joined the motor trade to sell some bloody cars and earn some money, or sell hours in the workshop and earn money and make some profit. And you'd be right to think that, because that's exactly why I joined the industry. And look at us, it's still here all these years later. But all of that list of stuff is stuff that's massively important in the world right now and is evolving, and we need to take all of that very seriously in order to move our businesses on and evolve with the rest of the world. But I want to throw a bit of a challenge in there, and I've done some posts on this recently to basically say that although, I'm working on some stuff around equity, diversity and inclusion, for me, the core of that is men's mental health. Now, we are a male-dominated industry, and we are a masculine energy sector. And that's got nothing to do with gender balance, but we do still have more men in the industry than we do women. I know there's a lot of stuff going on around that. And as a result, we also have a very similar look, let's say, to how we are in the industry. And I did a post this week which showed a picture of me being amongst a whole bunch of other white middle-aged men in a room. And it was a bit like a picture of Where's Wally, if I'm honest. But anyway, it dawned on me that if we do want to achieve EDI, equity, diversity and inclusion, we have to address men's mental health. At the very basic level, our brains are wired to protect our bodies. And one of our protection mechanisms is that we stick with what's familiar, we stick with what's safe, and what we know and what we are reassured about. That is a mental health issue. And so that's why we have a tendency to recruit in our own likeness. That's a human nature thing. Not unique to our industry, I know, but it's one of the things that we need to address. We also, and I come across this a lot, have a lot of managers and leaders who actually, when you dig a bit deeper, they actually lack confidence and they lack self-esteem and they lack a sense of worth. But they're trudging on, doing stuff every day, just ploughing on, getting the results in the way that you would expect. But the world is moving on and we need to be more open-minded to EDI. So we do need to address mental health and the well-being and the mindsets of some of the people around us. So you know where I am if you want to chat through that a little bit more. I am taking a bit of a stand on that, if I'm honest, and you've probably seen that over the last couple of weeks on LinkedIn, that I do genuinely believe that we are needing to address men's mental health in our industry specifically, and that whole thing around our beliefs and confidence and so on, if we're going to get anywhere near to achieving a good level of EDI. Because again, we're all wired to go for the familiar. We're all wired to go for what's safe and what we know and what's worked for us before. So mull that over, give it some thought. You know how to get hold of me. And let's start ticking off some of that stuff on that list. But let's not do it from a box ticking point of view. Let's do it because it's actually the right thing to do. And if we want our businesses to evolve and grow, we've got to evolve and grow as the world is as well. So you know how to get hold of me, and we will speak soon. Take care. Bye.
Well, some thought-provoking observations there from Stephen Whitton, as ever, and this time around equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And if you would like to get hold of Stephen, as he says, you can find him online. That's at menable.org, or you can email Stephen at stephen.whitton@menable.org, and that's Stephen with a PH.
Yeah, always food for thought on some of what he's on with and what he's thinking about and what he's passionate about as well. So thank you for that, as always, Stephen, to giving us some thought on these things.
Next headline is from Motor Trader, and it is Constellation owner TDR takes 3.1% stake in Vertu Motors. So this is a story that broke towards the end of the week, and it's really around how investor group TDR Capital, who are the owners of Constellation Automotive, has taken this 3.1% stake in Vertu Motors. Now, it's worth pointing out in the story that it highlights how the acquisitive TDR, which is a private equity house and, as I say, owner of Constellation, is the owner of Cinch, BCA, We Buy Any Car, and of course, since 2021, Marshall Motors, which it acquired. So the shareholding tipped over the 3% mark, which actually triggered the official stock exchange announcements. And this is what prompted the story in Motor Trader, and it was covered by the other publications as well. But there's some interesting points in the story, because it does actually track what Constellation's owner TDR has been doing over recent times. Of course, January last year, it purchased a 19.9% stake in Lookers. And this actually followed a lot of activity in the market, because at a similar time we had Headin looking at Pendragon, putting in a bid that failed. And at the moment, we've got this offer from Lithia on the table for Jardine. So there's a lot happening in terms of stakeholdings within the dealer groups, and definitely worth looking at the Motor Trader story. And I would also recommend Car Dealer's coverage of this particular story, because James Baggett does quite a long analysis of the trends and implications around this move, and what potentially it could mean in terms of OEMs. How do they feel about what could be the emergence of a supergroup, and indeed, what would the CMA allow? So a lot of questions posed there, and definitely worth having a look if you want to take a digger deep on this particular story.
Yeah, definitely. Say they've got some commentators, people like Mike Allen from Zeus Capital, who friend of the show. There, we've got Sanjay from Lideran. We've got David Kendrick in there from UHY. So it's created a lot of chatter across the network in terms of what the strategy is, the why, what's, and etc. What does this mean? But actually, when you start to look into it, it is fascinating, the views and some of the stuff that's coming out of it, because that it was above the 3%, which made it a requirement that it was declared, because once you get above that 3% in terms of shareholding of a business, it's got to be publicly declared. So there's a lot on that one, and it's quite interesting as to some of the views from some of the market commentators in there. And the car deal one does actually play an old, I say old, not that old, video of interview with the ex-Marshall boss and friend of the show, Dash Gupta, that talks about the supergroups.
Yeah,
In the onset of supergroups, and what that will look like. So fascinating insight there, and definitely worth a look at the car dealer analysis on the story behind it all.
yeah, you're absolutely right there, Phil. Because this emergence of supergroups, it was being talked about by Dash when he was at Marshalls, and Robert Forrester also a couple of years ago. And this is all part of the consolidation we're seeing in the sector, and feeds into what we've recently reported on how some of the PLCs are maybe undervalued and certainly attractive to investors at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So, final story of today is the heading back over to motortrade.com, and this is: majority of dealers don't use personalized videos for used car sales, which surprised me a little bit, that one, because I think I thought there was a lot more usage of videos, but there's some analysis here and the stats coming out of CitNOW, that basically says that the research carried out by CitNOW found that 80% of the top 100 dealer groups by turnover are not offering the option to request a personalized video within their used car listings. So some fascinating views here and statements on it, and it'd be interesting to see what get the conscience of this, of what the customers like and what they want from used car retailers, and what they want to see on their websites.
Yeah, exactly, because it does go on to say that See It Now actually commissioned some research of 1,000 UK motorists, and 43% of them said they would be more likely to buy a used car if the retailer sent a personalised video guiding them around the specific vehicle they inquired about. And this figure actually rises to 53% among that younger demographic, the 18 to 24-year-olds, many of whom will be buying their first car, sort of hinting at the demand for video among future generations of car buyers. So this is an interesting one, isn't it? And the just going back to that original figure of 80% of the top 100 not having that facility on their websites. So chances are they actually offer it, but they're not necessarily promoting it.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
So there could be a disconnect there, because like you, I was surprised by this particular headline, because you would think now it's pretty much the default position for franchised and independent dealers.
And you do see it go on. You do see that, and you do hear it where the salesperson is walking around talking to the customer while showing them the car in the virtual space. So, yeah, it'll be like you say. It could be a case of that it's just not offered on the website by those dealers that they've looked at. So, yeah, quite surprising, that one, and quite interesting findings there. But that's it for this week. I mean, we say we've got the interview there with our friend John O'Hanlon, and make your mind up. Do we, we'll get him back on again at some point in the future to see what he's done in hopefully not 2 years, John. Mine's a meat feast, thin crust. If we are any Waylands pizzas heading up my way, but no, fascinating interview there with John. So do not miss that one if you've not listened to the full interview there with our friend John O'Hanlon, and everything else. I mean, we'll try and keep you updated on a weekly basis of what's hitting the headlines. But certainly a busy week again, Curtis?
Yeah, but when wasn't it? But unfortunately, that's all for now. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio Podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.